right, Alexander, we should be live.
Mm-hmm.
Let's wait for people to jump on. Let me pop out the chat, pop out the super chat. Let's see if we've got a stream going. We're going to discuss Venezuela, everybody. And of course, I'm sure everyone that's going to be jumping into this chat real soon has probably already heard the news of the coup that's ongoing right now.
Yeah.
What do you make of it, Alexander? There's not much, it's hard to get a clear feel as to what's going on in Venezuela.
It's a very, very confused picture, Alex, but I'm going to make a few very general observations. Firstly, there don't seem to be large numbers of military involved in this. When one sees a coup happen, usually one sees large numbers of troops moving, armored vehicles, tanks, aircraft sometimes, as we saw in Turkey back in 2016. There's attempts to seize buildings, to control bases. None of this seems to be happening in Venezuela at the moment. The soldiers we've seen who have been appearing with opposition leaders, with Guaido specifically, seem to be few in number, lightly armed, and they don't seem to have much leadership behind them. To the extent that anybody can tell, that I can see at least, the organized military, the vast bulk of the military, seems to be still loyal to the Maduro government. And claims that were circulating earlier today that one of the air bases in Caracas had defected to Guaido seem to be untrue.
All right, so that doesn't seem to be holding true. You mentioned Turkey, and first of all, can you guys hear us all right in the chat? If you guys can hear if the sound is good, let us know. And also let us know if the picture is good. And welcome everybody to the chat. I didn't welcome everybody, Alexander, so I'm welcoming people as they're coming on. Hit that like button, everybody, as you get on this live chat about Venezuela and the coup that's happening, that's ongoing. I want to get back to your point about Turkey and the fact that, supposedly we have this coup in Venezuela. And I think you're going to get into the fact that this may not be a coup, or this may be one of the most poorly executed coups that we've seen. Yeah. Because if you're going to overthrow a government, your game better be tight. You've got to shut down. You've got to have the military 100% behind you. You've got to shut down all communication channels. All the communication channels. You got to pretty much put the country in the dark. And I'm going to make another point, Alexander. Usually successful coups are not done on a weekday. Usually You'll do them on a Friday, on a weekend, when there's a lull in society, and you're going to catch everybody off guard. And you mentioned Turkey. Even in Turkey, where the coup it seemed like it was well executed. There was people saying, actually, a lot of people believing that Erdogan was done. But the fact that they didn't close off some internet channels and he got on FaceTime was a game changer. He actually got to speak. That was a huge mistake. You got to make sure you cut off all communication, put the country in the dark. What do you make of what's happening with this coup? And I say coup, and I put it in quotes because I don't know. This thing looks really poorly executed.
Well, it looks abysmally executed. It seems absolutely chaotic. I'm not convinced, actually, that it's appropriate at this moment in time to refer to a coup at all, in the sense that, exactly as you correctly say, most coups that I know happen very late at night or in the early morning when most people are asleep. The first thing the coup plotters do is they take over the key communications places, the television, the radio, the telephone exchanges, all those sort of things, so that they cut off the country and the government from communicating with forces that might be loyal to itself. And of course, they move rapidly to arrest members of the government and their leading supporters. We see nothing like that here. I mean, this has all been a chaotic affair. So far as I can work it out, what seems to have happened is that a Venezuelan opposition leader, a very prominent one, Leopoldo Lopez, who is regarded by many people as Guaido's political patron and who has been under house arrest, was able somehow to escape arrest with the help of some members of the Venezuelan security forces. He then dashed with Guaido to this base near, not far away from his house. He then appealed to the troops there and to the commander of those troops at this base to basically join them in overthrowing Maduro's government. They seem to have been rebuffed. They apparently weren't able to enter the base, though there were many reports for a while suggesting that they had entered the base. They then did a quick impromptu video outside the base, calling on the military to sort of rise up against Maduro. Then they seem to have fled back to the sort of middle class areas of Caracas, where most of their support is, and they've been trying to organize demonstrations and protests throughout the remainder of the day. And the very latest reports suggest that they're making some sort of an attempt to get a protest march moving towards the presidential palace, which apparently is heavily guarded now by the military, the military which continues to back Maduro. Now, this doesn't look like a coup. It looks like a series of chaotic improvisations by people who are making it up on the fly. And there's no reports at the moment that any single important military unit has gone over to their side. And there's the reports on the contrary are that all of the top commanders of the military have been speaking to Maduro over the course of the day and have said that they continue to support the legitimate and constitutional government of Venezuela. So we're not, it seems to me, looking at a coup. I mean, it might evolve into something like that, but at the moment, it just looks like utter chaos and confusion, improvised in a very reckless and chaotic way by some opposition leaders who don't seem to be working to any clearly defined plan.
I mean, can you make the suggestion, Alexander, that, okay, now they're starting to get a march and they're trying to get, something going as far as a big protest crowd.
Yeah.
Can you make the assumption that maybe they're trying to kind of do like a Maidan on fast forward?
Yeah.
Like instead of like a 3-month, protest in the square of Kiev, one that dragged on for months and just built up. And of course had the elements of the U.S. and the deep state was behind a lot of those people there at the Maidan. But it was also there were also legitimate people as well with legitimate grievances. Yes. Can you make the claim that this is not so much a coup like you said, but now it's kind of morphing into let's get a big gathering, let's start to get people moving, let's get them to protest in the square, in the city center, in front of the president's residency, wherever we can, and maybe try to get some sort of, Maidan kind of moment for Venezuela?
I think that's exactly what this is. But of course, it's very important to go back to Maidan and to make this important point about Maidan. The reason Maidan succeeded, the Maidan protest succeeded and eventually evolved into an actual coup was because the Ukrainian government of Viktor Yanukovych did not take decisive action as it could have done to disperse the protesters on Maidan Square. It had the Ukrainian government had the means to do it. The security forces were ready to do it. We know that security officials were constantly telling Yanukovych that they wanted to do it, but he consistently, and for his own reasons, prevented them from doing it, so that eventually, as you rightly say, the protests built up. the security forces became demoralized and no longer had confidence in Yanukovych, and eventually the whole thing broke down. I don't think Maduro and the Venezuelan government are going to make that kind of mistake. On the contrary, the reports that are coming out say that the Venezuelan defense minister has actually warned protesters that if there's any attempt made to stage anything like that in Caracas, then they must understand that the Venezuelan authorities will crack down hard on it. So I think that already, if the prototype of this now is becoming the Maidan protest, I think it's based on a misunderstanding of why the Maidan protests succeeded, which is the weakness and indecision of the Ukrainian government rather than the strength of the protesters.
Do you think Maduro is consulting with Russia and China as to how to move forward with this, how to deal with this?
I've no doubt at all. I'm sure he's on the phone to all his supporters, both internationally, not just Russia and China. President Erdogan of Turkey has come out very strongly in support of him today. I'm sure he's talked to all his supporters. I'm sure he's getting advice from all sorts of quarters. And of course, he's been making very sure over the course of the day to speak to his various top military commanders and to make sure that they're loyal. So I'm sure that's what he's doing, and I'm sure he's doing it as we're speaking.
Do you think they're advising him along the lines like what you said to make sure that he squashes this, that Maduro squashes this very quickly?
Yes, I'm sure they are. I mean, they will also advise him to keep the level of force he uses proportionate to the protests that are ongoing. So I'm sure they're telling him, don't go around and machine gun people and their scores. I mean, that would be terrible. But I mean, I'm sure they're telling him, don't let a Maidan situation develop in Caracas.
I was just about to get to that, because one of the sparks that lit the Maidan, coup on fire was the snipers.
Yeah.
And I mean, we still don't know exactly who those snipers were, but
yes,
that could have been, that was definitely one of the sparks, and it could have been a false flag. God knows what it was. Maybe it was legit. Yeah. We don't know, but it definitely, to me,
yes,
this is the risk that I see, Maduro running as long as this drags on, that there could be some sort of false flag, some sort of event that the neocons and the deep state are going to use to ignite, a wider conflict.
That's absolutely correct. Now, can I just say about the sniper affair? There's two things to say about that. Firstly, there's been an awful lot of research into this, and the key person to look at is Professor Ivan Kachanovsky, who is a Canadian professor who's researched this in very great detail, and he has come to the view that it was a false flag. And this is somebody who is very well regarded in academic and scholarly quarters. And as he correctly points out, the police and criminal investigations that Ukraine launched into the sniper episode have led nowhere. So, we might be talking about a false flag in that case. The other thing to remember about the sniper incident in Ukraine is that it happened after months and weeks of protests. The mistake that was made in Ukraine in 2013 and 2014 was that the Ukrainian authorities did not stifle those protests right at the beginning, when it would have been possible to do so without excessive use of force. They let the thing go on, gather pace, allow the protesters on Maidan Square to become organized, allow many of them to acquire weapons, and they turned, in effect, what had been a protest movement at the beginning into a civil conflict. I think that the Russians will be explaining to Maduro, and I'm sure the Russians are the key players here because they understand the position very well, because of course they followed Maidan Square very closely. I'm sure they will be explaining to Maduro, you cannot let this happen to you again. And of course the Chinese experienced almost the same thing during the Tiananmen protests of 1989, when again allowed them to go on for far too long, so that when the crackdown came, it was more violent than it needed to be. And I'm sure they're also explaining to Maduro that he mustn't let this thing drag on in that way.
Yeah, I agree with you, because making the rounds right now on Twitter and a lot of social media is the event where the armored vehicle kind of runs over some of the Guaido protesters. And a lot of people, the media's like, they're outraged. All of a sudden they're outraged, the violence of Maduro. And I think they're looking for that one event that they could use to create, a wider conflict.
Yes.
And do you think that the neocons, the Boltons, the Pompeos, the Rubios, and these guys were very quick to jump on Guaido's video and Guaido's statement, very quick to support him? I mean, I think they got tipped off for sure as to what was going on. Do you think they're going to be able to push Trump to take some sort of action? Something along the lines of what he did in Syria, where, they showed the false flag, chemical weapons, photographs and attacks, and Trump all of a sudden, being very emotional, said, okay, let's do something. Do you think they're going to try to force his hand to take action?
I think it's a distinct possibility. One of the most interesting things about today, though, is that Trump himself has said nothing. At least I don't know of him having said anything. I mean, all the running so far has been made by people like Bolton, Pompeo, and Rubio. Trump himself has kept out of it. Now, I don't think he wants to see the United States involved in a conflict in Venezuela, but he's taken some very extreme positions on Venezuela as a result of the way in which Pompeo, Bolton, Pence, Rubio, and all those people have maneuvered him into supporting regime change there. And I think he is an emotional man, as you correctly say, and he may also feel that a lot of his political prestige now is invested in this thing. So I can see this thing escalating, and I agree with you. I think that is the danger. What Maduro and his people and his backers need to calculate is, as I said, they've got to stamp this out quickly. They can't allow it to fester over weeks and months. At the same time, as I said, they have to keep the degree of force they're going to use disproportionate. And can I just say, people who get angry when they see an armored vehicle collide with protesters, I have seen that myself happen in protests. That isn't that unusual. I think for anything really, really angry to happen, for Trump to really be persuaded to start, doing something really radical, we would need something a lot more violent than that. I think, as I said, a million armored car knocking down some people, bad and ugly as it is nowhere near enough.
All right, let's get to some super chats here, Alexander. Super chat from John Newhouse. How can we stop the U.S. state criminal psychopaths? Okay, thank you for that super chat. There we go. Well, that's a good question. How can we?
I will treat that as a rhetorical question. Lots of things are going on around the world to make it difficult to do for the United States to do these things. But it remains a superpower. It retains enormous resources, and when it is led by neocons, great power to do mischief, and it will continue to be that way for a long time.
Exactly. And we have a super chat from Steven. What do you think Russia and China's response to this will be? Kind of touched upon that. Is there anything else you want to add to this as far as what Russia?
Yeah, I mean, they're obviously giving verbal support, and they will be giving private advice to Maduro, but they're not on the scene. I mean, ultimately, at the moment, in this particular situation, it depends on Maduro, his supporters, and what the Venezuelan security forces do.
And you mentioned Turkey, that Turkey's vocally supported Maduro. They've actually come out and they've supported Maduro very, very strongly. Why is Turkey taking this stance?
Well, I think that well, for many reasons. I mean, I suspect that there's probably a personal bond between Maduro and Erdogan. I mean, I think they get on with each other. But I think, quite apart from anything else, I think Erdogan, who survived a coup in 2016, a coup attempt, I think he sees in Maduro a kindred spirit, somebody who's also facing many of the same forces that Erdogan is facing, the same opposition from the neocons in the United States, and the same attempts to organize coups. And I think he feels that he needs to support Venezuela, because if he doesn't support Venezuela, make it absolutely clear that this kind of thing is unacceptable, then he runs the risk of the same thing happening again to him.
Does Maduro have to arrest, if this coup fails, does he have to arrest Guaido? And if he does arrest Guaido, doesn't he once again run a risk of pissing off the U.S., pissing off Trump, the neocons, and give them an excuse for some sort of intervention into Venezuela?
My own personal view about this is, firstly, he does need to arrest Guaido. You can't just have somebody organising a coup attempt and calling upon the military to rise up against the government and then leave them alone, as if nothing had happened. I think if this attempt is defeated, then Guaido needs to be arrested, and I'm sure he will be, because I have to say, though I think the United States will complain loudly if Guaido is arrested, I think that if the coup fails, Guaido's credibility will be severely damaged. And I think that even people in Washington will start to say to themselves, well, look, we backed the wrong horse here, because realistically, Guaido isn't able to make a real push to overthrow Maduro. We've been backing him since January, and Maduro is still there. And this frankly farcical coup that he's trying to launch today is another reason why we can't go on backing him, because he's not someone who in the end can be taken seriously.
All right, Alexander, follow me on this one now. I'm going to throw something at you. Let me figure out how to put this together.
Right.
Guaido was fizzling anyway, right? His support was fizzling away. We mentioned it during our live the other day.
Absolutely.
That
Absolutely.
His whole claim to be president was not going anywhere. And the more this dragged on, the more people were not taking him seriously whatsoever.
Yes.
Do you think that maybe the neocons and the deep state, they said, you know what, Juan, get on TV, do your shtick, do your show, whatever. Go ahead, try for a coup. Throw this Hail Mary, this last minute, attempt to try and be president, to try and get rid of Maduro and be president. Either way, the deep state and the neocons were going to get rid of him anyway. Now they can say, you know what, let Maduro, let him try. If he succeeds, which we doubt he will, but if 1 in a million chance he succeeds, great. Most likely he's going to fall flat in his face because the guy's incompetent. Maduro's going to arrest him. We get rid of him. And we then have another narrative to throw against Venezuela. More sanctions, more pressure, reload, go to plan B or plan C, find the new guy, find the new person to throw in there to start causing trouble in Venezuela. I mean, could you also say that this is kind of working towards the neocons, the deep state's favor? It's facilitating their need to, one, get rid of a guy that was incompetent anyway, while also villainizing Maduro and Venezuela.
I think there's a lot of merit in this analysis. First of all, I mean, this whole episode today does have the appearance of, frankly, recklessness and perhaps a measure of desperation. I mean,
exactly. It seems so desperately stupid.
Stupid. I mean, it just wasn't working. The whole Guaido thing wasn't working. So, I mean, it doesn't look as if Guaido and, as I said, and Lopez, his patron, deciding to go for broke and try something big in the hope that it might just pull off. And the US backing it because, of course, from their point of view, as you rightly say, if it fails, they get rid of Guaido. and he's been an embarrassment, frankly, and they can move on and create a narrative about the brutal Maduro government suppressing the heroic people, heroic
I mean, he's
freedom-loving
been a
people of
bust.
Venezuela.
The
He's
guy's
been a
been
bust,
a
exactly,
bust.
exactly. And if by any chance it succeeds, well, we got what we wanted. So I mean, I could see a lot of logic in this. I would not be. I mean, some people in Washington are certainly capable of thinking in that way. I've no doubt of that.
And what do you think comes next if Guaido does get arrested by Maduro and does fail? What do you think the U.S. has up their sleeve? What do you think the
Well,
Boltons and the Pompeos and the Abrams and these guys have up their sleeve?
I had there was a most worrying article on Zero Hedge in which he spoke about how Eric Prince, who is the head of Blackwater, is now trying to put together a mercenary army of 5,000 men to take on Maduro in Venezuela. And I mean, I think if, as I said, these protests, this coup attempt in Caracas fails, then, as I said, I suspect that Plan B will be an attempt to create in Venezuela some kind of insurgency situation. Difficult, I suspect, and it may not be something that the neighboring countries, Brazil and Colombia, are too keen on, but the neocons are nothing if not persistent in pursuing their regime change objectives. And I suspect that that's probably the next stage of what they would try to do.
All right, we've got 1,000 people on this live stream. Guys, hit that like button, smash that like button. If you're not subscribed to the channel, subscribe to the channel. And remember to click the notifications bell to get notifications every time we push out a new video. And of course, go to the Duran shop, buy a t-shirt, help fund this channel. Alexander, Spain, which I think has recognized the Guaido government, they have come out against the coup. What do you think Europe's position is going to be? Do you think they're going to follow along the same lines as Spain?
Well, who knows? I mean, I think lots of countries around the world are going to be looking at the situation in Venezuela very closely, and they're going to be saying to themselves, really, do we really want to go back to the old world of the United States fomenting and organizing military coups in other countries? And I suspect that in Spain, where there's just been an election, a difficult election, I think a lot of people in Spain were very upset about the way in which the Sanchez government backed the Guaido at the instigation of the United States. I suspect a lot of people in Europe were not happy with the way their governments came and supported Guaido also. I'd be surprised, for example, if people in Germany were, knowing Germany quite well. So I think that coups are a red line for a lot of people. I think if they felt that there was going to be a genuine protest movement, that'd be one thing. But I think to see actual outright coup backed by soldiers and obviously manipulated from far away by the United States, I think that might be something that might stick in some people's throats. But I have to say this also. I mean, Spain may be wobbling, but I can't imagine Angela Merkel or Emmanuel Macron or Theresa May coming out against anything that the United States is doing in Venezuela, to be realistic about it.
All right, Alexander, there's a couple of people in the live chat saying that it's the Duran USA bashing again. You know, we're coming out, we're saying some bad things about the U.S. and what they're doing. How would you address that? I mean, okay, you have the people that can make the argument that they could say, Venezuela has been mismanaged, it's corrupt, there's a large part of the population does live in poverty or lives in misery. And socialism, you could even throw out the socialism narrative. Socialism doesn't work. You see what it's done to the country. It's destroyed the country, so on and so forth. The country does need change. It needs reform. It needs to, get its act together. On the flip side, you could see, Maduro is the elected president. He is the legitimate president of the country. And what is happening there is indeed, even though it's probably the worst coup that I've seen organized in the last, 10, 20 years, that's for sure. But you could say that there is an attempt to overthrow the legitimate government of Venezuela. The U.S. is, I think, whether they're they've organized it, or whether they're, kind of, nudging Guaido and saying, come on, do this and do that, we'll support you. Who knows the level of extent that the U.S. is involved. Are we USA bashing here by,
No, we're not
putting this
USA bashing. Can I just say something? I have been very critical of Maduro, and I don't take back any of those criticisms. I think he has mismanaged the economy. I think he has been very provocative about many of the things he said in international relations. I don't think he's managed affairs in Venezuela at all well, and I don't think he's managed the political process in Venezuela at all well. I think I don't feel comfortable, for example, about the way in which he simply passed a law essentially delegitimizing the Venezuelan parliament after he lost parliamentary elections, and created an entirely new parliament, which he called a Constituent Assembly, to replace it. So I am not coming here to say that Maduro is all good, but I repeat this point many times. What goes on in Venezuela is the problem of Venezuela. It is for Venezuelans themselves to sort out, which in time they no doubt would. The United States interfering in Venezuelan affairs in this way is not going to facilitate a resolution, a good resolution of Venezuela's problems. It is going to create a deeper crisis in Venezuela, which will inevitably blow back in the end on the United States, which is being seen around the world as the country which meddles in everyone's affairs and tries to shape everyone's destinies. Now, we've just gone through 3 years of Americans complaining angrily and bitterly about how the Russians supposedly interfered in an American election. This interference supposedly amounted to a couple of Facebook posts, a couple of Twitter posts, and the leaking of certain emails which showed skullduggery by Hillary Clinton and her campaign. Yet Americans profess to be outraged by that. Why should conduct which Americans find so outrageous when it happens in their own country be considered acceptable when it is practiced on an immeasurably bigger scale by the United States in other countries like Venezuela? I think the United States, great country as it is, needs to learn to leave other countries and peoples alone.
All right, we got a super chat from Peter Mine Alexander, Peter from New Zealand. The armored vehicle in the van, there was one of the same vehicles hijacked by anti-GVT militants or those in military uniforms. What do you know about the timing of the hijack and the run protesters that is now going viral? I think this plays upon what you were saying about the snipers, and that there are risks of having false flags, come up and escalate the situation. I mean, it is a very, very dangerous, game that's being played right now by Guaido and by the neocons.
Absolutely, Mark. Can I stress? I mean, I simply don't know. I mean, I don't know who. I've heard what the questioner said about, that this was an armored vehicle seized by people and that this was some sort of false flag. I mean, I don't know that. I have no information that corroborates that. I'm not saying it's not so. I just don't know about it. But false flags do happen. I mean, they are not just a conspiracy theory. They can be a conspiracy fact. And obviously, in a volatile situation like this one, we have to be concerned and afraid of one.
Yeah, and I get very nervous when images like that get picked up so quickly by Reuters, by Bloomberg, ABC, NBC, and then they make their way viral. I mean, it seems like there's such excellent collusion on the media side with all the media channels, and then you have the social media, the Twitters and the Facebooks to get those algorithms moving and to get those images to reach as many people as possible.
Well, yes, and I may add something else, which is, of course, and I come back to what I say said before, it is ultimately a minor incident. I mean, as I said, I've seen riots and I know what happens in riots. I mean, things like that happen in riots. This is not, in the scale of things, a big event. And it shouldn't be treated or reported as if it was, even if it was the Venezuelan security forces who were actually operating that armored vehicle.
Do you think there's a case, Alexander, for the U.S. and for the Trump administration to engage in Venezuela? Do you think there's a way for them to do it without having to resort to the Guaido and the coups, without losing face?
Well, I think it's going to be very difficult to find a way for the United States to extricate itself from the situation without losing face, which does not involve some form of regime change in Caracas. And that's really the very great danger in all of this, because the United States is now so committed to seeing the end of Maduro and regime change in Venezuela that without it, I don't really see how they can escape from this without looking foolish and without looking unsuccessful. Having said that, that doesn't mean
could
that
Trump
US
have his North Korea moment, his like Kim moment, where they Rocket Man, we're gonna nuke you, and then all of a sudden, there we are, we're having a meeting together.
Well, the problem is Donald Trump didn't specifically say that he wanted to see regime change in North Korea. At least he didn't encourage it in the same way. He didn't. I mean, I can remember even during the worst periods of time when he was saying all sorts of terrible things about Rocket Man, he was talking about sitting next to Kim Jong-un and sharing a hamburger with him, for example. He's never talked about Maduro in that way. Now, I think this is a big mistake. And countries that make mistakes and governments that make mistakes should be honest about that to themselves, and they should back off and change their policies. And I think if they did, they would find that Maduro actually and the government he leads in Venezuela are no conceivable threat to the United States or to the American people at all, and that they could be left alone. And I think that is the correct policy for the United States to follow. I don't say that they need to embrace Maduro. I say that they should simply leave him alone. But I don't see them doing that, frankly, even though that would be my advice to them.
All right, we have a super chat from Nigel. Prime Minister May has mishandled affairs in the UK. Does this mean other countries like the US should engineer a regime change in Britain? Of course, Nigel is making a good point there.
He's making an excellent point, and that goes back directly to the point about all those people who were saying that we're bashing the US all the time. We're not bashing the US. We're simply saying countries should be left alone to make their own mistakes and to correct their own mistakes. In Britain, we've made a terrible mistake with Brexit. We've made a mess of it, and we've got to be left alone to sort it out. We don't want the United States coming to Britain and sorting it out for us. The United States would not sort it out properly. And the same is true of Venezuela. Venezuela is a sovereign country, and it should be treated like that.
Well, you can make the argument that Obama definitely weighed in on Brexit. And
well,
that may have had a big effect. That may have had a big effect,
well, it did.
When the vote came around.
I'm sure it did, because I'm sure it persuaded an awful lot of people to vote for Brexit. But speaking seriously, yes, he did. Obama did interfere in Brexit. But I mean, I think the point that Nigel is making is that, the United States doesn't come along and foment a plot against Theresa May because she's made a mess of things here. And it shouldn't do the same in Caracas. I mean, it should leave Venezuela alone.
All right. Alexander, what are we looking at then? What's the next 24 hours hold? What do you think?
Well, I think this is the key. I think we've got to wait and see what happens overnight, because this is how things are going to start to evolve over the next couple of hours. I mean, I think I'm right in saying that it's afternoon now in Venezuela, and we will see how events progress over the course of the day. Generally, I make an observation here. Coups, if they're going to succeed, must succeed fast. With every hour that a coup does not succeed, it loses momentum. So if this is a coup, then it needs to succeed fast, and it doesn't seem as it's doing so. If this is a protest movement, then of course the opposite applies, and it's the authorities who need to get on top of the situation quickly. I think by this time tomorrow we will know. My guess is that by this time tomorrow there will still be some protests in Caracas, but Maduro will still be president of Venezuela.
And finally, Alexander, why do you think Venezuela is such a divisive topic? I mean, I'm looking at, once again, I'm looking at the chat, and I'm reading what people are saying. There's a large majority of people that are saying, hands off of Venezuela, leave the country alone.
Yeah.
There's a coup, and there's the other people that are, okay, they're bashing the Duran, so on and so forth. You guys aren't saying anything bad about Putin, this and that. But I see where they're getting at. Once again, there's people that, they're Trump supporters, or they follow the Duran on other topics. But when it comes to Venezuela, they have that belief that that government has to be done away with, and we need to get, a new government in place. Why do people take such hard lines on Venezuela? And obviously, I'm not a socialist by any means. I'm a pretty conservative, capitalist kind of guy, but I recognize that when you're overthrowing a government, you're overthrowing a government. So, I mean, do you want to weigh in on that? Why is it such a divisive?
I think you put your finger on it. I think it's the S word. Maduro says that he's a socialist. He leads a government in Venezuela that says it's a socialist government. Donald Trump is running against socialism. I think an awful lot of people in the United States look at Venezuela. They're saying, look, this is what socialism brings with it. It brings economic chaos. It brings disaster. We don't want that in the United States. And we certainly don't want people in the United States who say they support socialism, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who, of course, is a Latino as well. So I think that plays a role, and I think that plays a big role in all of this. I have to say, I think also in these sorts of conflicts, I think there is a sort of belief that many people in the United States have, which I've come across, which is that Latin America is their neighborhood, is the US's neighborhood, and that the United States has some kind of residual right to sort of guide that region. All I will say about that is that first, it's wrong, and secondly, look at the state of the region and how badly it's been managed. And do you really want to involve the United States in that? And maybe, possibly, the reason it's so badly managed and in such a bad way is because the United States has been meddling in it for so long. So I think that, there are various factors here, but I think that socialism certainly plays a big, big role in this.
The S word. All right, Alexander,
Yes.
I think we should wrap it up there. We've been going for about 45 minutes. Guys, thank you for joining us in the chat. We have 1,159 people joined us. All right. We will be covering this story, and we'll see tomorrow what the day brings in Venezuela. My hunch is that this thing is going to fizzle away. I can't be 100% sure, but that's just what my hunch is saying. We'll see.
So mine also, but as I said, we must reserve, we must wait and see, because we can't be absolutely sure of anything at this situation.
Yeah, let me see if I got all the super chats, Alexander. Yes, I got all the super chats. Thank you guys for your super chats. Hit that like button, share the channel with everybody you know. Alexander Merkurs, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Thank you, Alexander, for this live stream. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this live. Have a great evening or a great morning wherever you are. And we'll have some videos coming out tomorrow as well. One on Ukraine and Russia, I believe we have coming out tomorrow.
Indeed, sir.
That'll be a good video, so stay tuned. All right, everybody, take care.
Indeed, sir. Take care.